Location: the Plaza Hotel, New York, 10:50 a.m. The Plaza Hotel's grand ballroom buzzed with the restrained elegance of 300 guests awaiting Manhattan's most talked-about wedding. $40,000 white floral arrangements graced every table, while a string quartet played Pachelbel with Swiss watch precision. Backstage, Alexander James Whitmore III adjusted his Italian shirt cuffs for the 10th time in 5 minutes. Tall, dark-haired, with diamond-cutting blue eyes and a jawline that would make Michelangelo weep, he was the living definition of American privilege. At 32, he commanded a $3 billion financial empire and had never heard the word no, except from his father, who had forced him to accept this arranged marriage to Victoria Sterling Hayes, heiress to the East Coast's oldest textile dynasty. Mr. Whitmore, 10 minutes, announced his assistant Marcus Chen, checking his Rolex for the 3rd time. I can count, Marcus, Alexander replied with that coldness that made executives break into cold sweats. And stop acting like this is my funeral. On the other side of the door, hidden among the orchids, Jonathan Sterling Hayes, Victoria's cousin and secret architect of this union, watched everything with a smile that never reached his eyes. Perfect, he thought, adjusting his tie. In 2 hours, Whitmore and Sterling Hayes companies will be united. Victoria will be miserable for life, and I'll finally have access to the international contracts my uncle always denied me. Alexander has no idea what he's about to sign. In the main ballroom, Emma Rose Thompson balanced a tray of hors d'oeuvres with the grace of someone born to serve. At 26, her honey-brown eyes contrasted with auburn hair that insisted on escaping her professional chignon. A Columbia Literature graduate, an achievement she'd paid for with 3 simultaneous jobs, she now served canapés to pay off her mother's cancer treatment debts. Emma, table 7 needs more champagne, shouted Chef Rodriguez from the kitchen. On my way, Emma replied, but her eyes fixed on the framed photograph of Alexander Whitmore at the ballroom entrance. My God, she thought, do men like this actually exist? It was at exactly that moment of distraction that destiny decided to intervene. Alexander emerged from backstage like a gladiator entering the arena, and Emma, still mesmerized by his magnetic presence, tripped over the $500,000 Persian rug. The tray flew in slow motion, crystal glasses, caviar canapés, and most importantly, an entire bowl of artisanal tomato sauce transformed into deadly projectiles. The red liquid hit Alexander square in the chest, spreading across his white shirt like a Tarantino crime scene. The silence that followed was more deafening than the Big Bang. 300 pairs of eyes turned toward the red-headed waitress who had just destroyed the wedding of the century. Victoria Sterling Hayes, beautiful as a porcelain doll and equally cold, let out a shriek that made the chandelier crystals vibrate. Emma stammered, her eyes meeting Alexander's. For 1 second, just 1 second, she saw something beyond fury, genuine surprise, as if it were the first time in years that anything had caught him off guard. Then the mask returned. You, Alexander said in a voice so low and dangerous it made Emma step back. Just destroyed an $8,000 Armani. Sir, I can explain. No. He raised his hand, and the gesture was so imperious that Emma fell silent immediately. Can you pay $8,000? Emma felt her cheeks burn. No, sir. Then I suggest you start thinking about how you're going to compensate for this incident. Jonathan watched the scene with renewed interest. Interesting, he thought. Alexander never lost control like this. And look how he's staring at her. Maybe this wedding isn't as guaranteed as I imagined. Alexander, Victoria approached with calculated steps. We need to resolve this. The guests are waiting. But Alexander didn't look away from Emma. There was something in those honey-brown eyes that intrigued him. Fear, yes, but also defiance, as if she wanted to apologize and tell him to go to hell at the same time. What's your name? He asked. Emma Thompson, sir. Well, Emma Thompson, he said, taking a step toward her, so close she could smell his expensive cologne mixed with tomato sauce. You and I need to talk. And that's how, with artisanal ketchup dripping down an Italian shirt and 300 guests watching slack-jawed, Emma Rose Thompson entered the life of Alexander James Whitmore III in a way neither of them would ever forget. Exactly 9 minutes remained until the ceremony. What could possibly go wrong? Location: Plaza Hotel Private Suite, 11:05 a.m. The presidential suite's marble bathroom felt like a gilded prison as Alexander stripped off his ruined shirt, tomato sauce still clinging to his perfectly sculpted torso. Emma stood frozen by the door, clutching a stack of pristine towels like a shield, trying desperately not to stare at the masterpiece that was his bare chest. "Well?" Alexander's voice cut through the tension like a blade. "Are you going to help, or just stand there gawking?" Emma's cheeks flamed crimson. I don't... You don't what? Think? Because that much was obvious when you decided to redecorate my wedding attire." He turned toward her, and she caught her breath. Even angry, even covered in sauce, he was devastatingly beautiful. "Look," Emma found her voice, stepping forward with more courage than she felt. "I said I was sorry. It was an accident. An $8,000 accident." Alexander's blue eyes bore into hers. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" 3 floors below, Jonathan Sterling Hayes paced the bridal suite, his mind racing. "This is perfect," he thought, adjusting his cufflinks with calculated precision. Alexander upstairs with some nobody waitress, Victoria having a meltdown, and me with the perfect opportunity to suggest we postpone the wedding. Just long enough for me to convince Uncle Charles that Alexander isn't reliable husband material. The textile contracts will be mine by Christmas. "Everything," Emma shot back, surprising them both with her vehemence. "I've ruined everything, haven't I? Your perfect wedding, your perfect shirt, your perfect life where nobody dares to breathe wrong in your presence." Alexander blinked. In his 32 years, no one, absolutely no one, had ever spoken to him like that. Board members cowered, socialites simpered, even his father chose his words carefully. But this slip of a woman, this nobody waitress, was standing in his private bathroom, calling out his arrogance like she had every right in the world. It was intoxicating. "You don't know anything about my life," he said, but his voice had lost its sharp edge. "I know enough." Emma's honey-brown eyes flashed with defiance. "I know you think everyone exists to serve you. I know you've never had to worry about money or sick parents or working 3 jobs just to pay rent. I know you're marrying a woman you don't love for a business deal disguised as romance." The accuracy of her assessment hit him like a physical blow. "You know nothing about Victoria and me. I know you didn't look at her the way you're looking at me right now." The words hung between them like a live wire. Alexander's breath caught, and for a moment, just a moment, his carefully constructed walls crumbled. She was right. He'd never looked at Victoria with this burning intensity, this desperate need to understand what lay beneath the surface. A sharp knock interrupted the charged silence. "Alexander!" Victoria's voice carried through the door, pitched with barely controlled hysteria. "The guests are asking questions. We need to—" "In a minute," Alexander called back, his eyes never leaving Emma's face. "A minute?" Victoria's laugh was brittle as glass. "Our wedding is supposed to start in 5 minutes, and you're in there with the help?" Emma flinched, as if she'd been slapped. The word help dripped with such disdain, such casual cruelty, that Alexander felt an unexpected surge of protective anger. "Don't," he said quietly to Emma, who had started backing toward the door. "Don't let her make you feel small." "Why do you care?" Emma whispered. The question hit him harder than it should have. Why did he care? This woman was nobody, a waitress who'd just destroyed his carefully orchestrated morning. He should be furious. He should be demanding compensation, firing her, making her disappear from his perfectly ordered world. Instead, he found himself stepping closer. "I don't know," he admitted, his voice rough with honesty that surprised them both. Downstairs in the chapel, Jonathan watched the minutes tick by with growing satisfaction. 11:07, he noted. 7 minutes late. The society pages will have a field day. Whitmore wedding, delayed by kitchen mishap. Perfect. Another knock, more insistent this time. Alexander James Whitmore. Victoria's voice cracked like a whip. Open this door immediately. Emma jumped, reality crashing back. I should go. This is insane. You're getting married in... Am I? The words slipped out before Alexander could stop them. Emma stared at him, her lips parted in shock. What? You heard me. Alexander's voice grew stronger, more certain with each word. You asked if I was getting married. I'm asking myself the same question. The bathroom door burst open as Victoria stormed in, her wedding dress a cloud of ivory silk and righteous fury. Her green eyes took in the scene. Alexander shirtless, Emma clutching towels, the intimate space between them, and her beautiful face contorted with rage. How dare you, she hissed, but her venom was directed entirely at Emma. You little nobody! You did this on purpose, didn't you? Saw an opportunity to seduce a rich man and... That's enough. Alexander's voice was dangerously quiet. Enough? Victoria whirled on him. Our wedding is falling apart, and you're defending this. This. Careful, Alexander warned, stepping protectively in front of Emma. Very careful. Victoria's perfectly applied makeup couldn't hide the shock that flooded her features. In all their months of engagement, Alexander had never defended anyone against her, had never stepped between her and her targets. Emma touched his shoulder, just barely, just a whisper of contact, and he felt it like an earthquake. I should really go, Emma said softly, before this gets worse. No. The word came out harder than Alexander intended. You shouldn't have to run from her, or from anyone. And in that moment, as Emma looked up at him with those honey-brown eyes full of surprise and something that might have been hope, Alexander James Whitmore III realized that everything he thought he wanted, the perfect wedding, the perfect bride, the perfect merger, meant absolutely nothing. What he wanted was standing right in front of him, covered in tomato sauce stains, and wielding more courage than anyone in his privileged circle had ever shown. The wedding bells began to chime 11:15. 15 minutes late. And Alexander Whitmore, for the first time in his life, didn't give a damn about being on time. Location, Plaza Hotel Chapel, 11:20 a.m. The chapel buzzed with the kind of nervous energy that preceded social disasters. 300 of Manhattan's elite shifted in their seats, whispering behind Hermes fans and checking Cartier watches, 20 minutes late. In high society, 20 minutes might as well be 20 years. Alexander stood at the altar in a fresh shirt, his third of the morning, but his mind wasn't on the ceremony. It was on honey-brown eyes and the way Emma had stood her ground against Victoria's viciousness. The way she'd touched his shoulder with such gentle certainty, like she had every right in the world to comfort him, which was insane. He was Alexander James Whitmore III. He didn't need comforting. Did he? Father McKenna, the officiating priest, leaned close. Son, are you feeling all right? You look like you've seen a ghost. Something like that, Alexander murmured, scanning the crowd. Where was she? Had Emma left? The thought sent an unexpected spike of panic through his chest. Victoria glided down the aisle in her $40,000 dress, every inch the perfect bride. Beautiful, poised, exactly what his father had ordered, what the board expected, what the merger required. So why did she look like a stranger? In the back row, Jonathan Sterling Hayes watched with predatory satisfaction. Perfect, he thought, noting Alexander's distracted expression, the way the groom's eyes kept darting toward the service doors. He's completely rattled. One more push and this whole charade falls apart. Then I swoop in as the voice of reason, suggesting we postpone until Alexander gets his head straight. Uncle Charles will be so grateful for my level-headedness, he'll hand me those textile contracts on a silver platter. Emma pressed herself against the kitchen door, watching through the crack as Victoria approached the altar. This was wrong. All wrong. She should be halfway home by now, pretending this morning never happened. Instead, she was hiding like some lovesick teenager, watching a man she'd known for 30 minutes marry a woman who'd called her the help with such cutting disdain. "What are you doing?" Chef Rodriguez appeared beside her, frowning. "Nothing," Emma lied. "Just checking if they need anything. They need you to disappear before you cause more trouble." His voice was kind but firm. "Emma mija, forget whatever happened up there. Men like that? They don't change. Not for girls like us." Emma's heart clenched because she knew he was right. Alexander Whitmore lived in a different universe, one where people like her were invisible unless they spilled things on designer shirts. The moment of connection she'd felt was probably just her imagination, a desperate fantasy born from too many romance novels and too little sleep. But then why had he defended her? Why had he stepped between her and Victoria's cruelty like some avenging angel in an Italian shirt? "Dearly beloved," Father McKenna began, his voice carrying across the chapel, "we are gathered here today." Wait. The word cracked through the chapel like lightning. Every head turned toward Alexander, who stood frozen at the altar, his blue eyes wide with something that looked dangerously close to panic. "I'm sorry," he said, louder this time. I need a moment." Victoria's perfect composure cracked. "Alexander, what are you—" "I said I need a moment." His voice carried the authority of a man who'd never been denied anything. But there was something else there, too. Something raw and desperate that made Emma's breath catch. Jonathan's pulse quickened. This is it, he thought, rising from his seat with practiced concern. Time to be the hero. "Perhaps," Jonathan called out, his voice pitched to carry across the stunned silence. "We should postpone this until Alexander is feeling better. Clearly he's under some stress." "I'm not stressed," Alexander cut him off, his gaze sharpening as it landed on Victoria's cousin. Something in Jonathan's too eager expression set off alarm bells. "I'm thinking clearly for the first time in months." The kitchen door creaked as Emma pushed it open wider, unable to resist watching this disaster unfold. Alexander's eyes found hers across the chapel, and the world seemed to contract to just that connection. That impossible electric pull that defied every rule of logic and social propriety. "Alexander!" Victoria hissed, grabbing his arm. "Everyone is watching. Think about what you're doing." "I am thinking," he said, but he couldn't look away from Emma. "For the first time in my life, I'm actually thinking instead of just doing what's expected." Father McKenna cleared his throat. "Son, perhaps we could discuss this privately." "No." Alexander's voice grew stronger. "I think I've done enough privately. Victoria, Don't." Victoria's mask finally shattered, revealing the fury beneath. "Don't you dare humiliate me in front of everyone because of some waitress with ketchup stains on her uniform." The cruelty in her voice made Emma flinch, but it did something else too. It made Alexander's expression turn to ice. "Her name is Emma," he said quietly, but his words carried to every corner of the chapel. "And she has more class in her little finger than this entire room combined." Jonathan felt his carefully laid plans crumbling. This wasn't going according to script. Alexander was supposed to be the unreliable one, the one who needed guidance. Not this. This romantic hero defending some nobody against society's golden girl. Emma's heart hammered against her ribs. This couldn't be happening. Men like Alexander didn't throw away billion-dollar mergers for women like her. They didn't stand up in front of Manhattan's elite and, "I can't do this," Alexander said, his voice carrying absolute certainty. "Victoria, you deserve someone who loves you the way you should be loved, but that someone isn't me." The chapel erupted in chaos. Gasps, shouts, the rustle of 300 people turning to their neighbors in shock. Victoria's face went white beneath her perfectly applied makeup. "You're making the biggest mistake of your life," she whispered. "Maybe," Alexander agreed, pulling off his wedding ring and placing it gently in her trembling hands. "But it's my mistake to make." He stepped down from the altar, his eyes never leaving Emma's face. Every step toward her felt like a choice, like a door slamming shut on his old life and opening onto something terrifying and wonderful. Jonathan watched in horror as his perfect plan disintegrated. This can't be happening, he thought desperately. I need those contracts. I need this merger to fail on my terms, not because Alexander grew a conscience. Emma stood paralyzed as Alexander approached, vaguely aware of Chef Rodriguez muttering prayers in Spanish beside her. Emma, Alexander said when he reached the kitchen doors, his voice rough with emotion. I know this is insane. I know you don't owe me anything after the morning you've had. But I need to ask you something. What? She whispered. Will you have coffee with me? Such a simple question. Such a normal request. After all the drama, all the chaos, all the million-dollar disasters, he was asking her for coffee, like they were two ordinary people who'd met under ordinary circumstances. Emma looked past him at the chapel full of scandalized elite, at Victoria standing alone at the altar in her designer dress, at the wreckage of what should have been the social event of the season. Then she looked back at Alexander, really looked at him, and saw not the arrogant CEO who'd snapped at her an hour ago, but a man who'd just sacrificed everything for the chance to know her better. I don't drink coffee, she said. Alexander's face fell. Oh, I prefer tea. The smile that broke across his face was like sunrise after the longest night. Tea, then. I know a place. Jonathan Sterling Hayes watched them walk away together, his perfectly manicured hands clenched into fists. This isn't over, he thought venomously. Alexander Whitmore just made himself the most vulnerable man in Manhattan, and I'm going to make sure he pays for ruining my plans. As Emma and Alexander disappeared through the service exit, leaving behind a chapel full of chaos and a bride abandoned at the altar, neither of them noticed the man in the expensive suit following at a careful distance. The real game was just beginning. Location: Magnolia Bakery, Upper West Side, 12:30 p.m. The tiny corner table at Magnolia Bakery felt like another universe compared to the plaza's opulent chaos. Alexander sat across from Emma, still in his wedding attire minus the boutonniere, while she clutched a steaming mug of Earl Grey like a lifeline. The bakery buzzed with ordinary New Yorkers enjoying ordinary Sunday brunches, blissfully unaware they were witnessing the aftermath of Manhattan's most spectacular social implosion. So, Emma said, her voice barely above a whisper, you just walked away from $1 billion merger to have tea with me. I walked away from a loveless marriage disguised as a business transaction, Alexander corrected, stirring his untouched coffee. The tea is just a bonus. Emma studied his face, searching for signs of regret or second thoughts. Instead, she found something she'd never seen before: peace. Despite the chaos he'd left behind, despite the scandal that would follow him for years, Alexander Whitmore looked more relaxed than he had all morning. Your phone hasn't stopped buzzing, she pointed out. Alexander glanced at the device face down on the table, its screen lighting up every few seconds. Probably my father, the board, Victoria's family, the press. He shrugged. They can wait. They can wait? Emma's voice cracked with disbelief. Alexander, you destroyed everything. Your reputation, your company, my prison, he finished quietly. Emma, I was marrying a woman I didn't love to merge companies I didn't care about, to please a father who's never been proud of me anyway. What exactly did I destroy? 3 blocks away, Jonathan Sterling Hayes sat in the back of his Tesla, phone pressed to his ear with barely contained fury. No, Uncle Charles. I couldn't stop him, he hissed. He completely lost his mind over some waitress. Yes, I'm tracking them. The Magnolia Bakery on Columbus. No, I think we need a different approach now. Alexander's shown he can't be trusted with important decisions. Maybe it's time the board reconsidered who should be running Whitmore Industries. Emma's heart ached for the pain she heard beneath Alexander's casual dismissal. Tell me about your father. Alexander's laugh was bitter. Charles Whitmore II built the company from nothing. Never let me forget it. I've spent 32 years trying to earn his approval, and the closest I ever came was agreeing to marry Victoria. He met her eyes. Funny thing is, walking away from that altar felt more like winning than anything I've ever done. Even though it cost you everything? Did it? Alexander leaned forward, his blue eyes intense. Emma, in the space of 2 hours you've made me question everything I thought I wanted. You've shown me more courage than I've seen in boardrooms full of executives. You've made me laugh, made me angry, made me feel more alive than I have in years. If that's what losing everything gets me, maybe I should have lost it sooner. Emma felt heat flood her cheeks. No one had ever spoken to her like that. Like she was precious, important, worth sacrificing for. You don't know me. Not really. Then tell me. Alexander's voice was gentle but urgent. Tell me everything. Start with why a Columbia literature graduate is serving canapes at society weddings. Emma's hands tightened around her mug. The story wasn't pretty, wasn't the kind of tale that impressed billionaires. But Alexander had just thrown away his perfect life, so maybe she could share her imperfect one. My mom was diagnosed with stage 4 ovarian cancer 2 years ago, she began, her voice steady despite the pain in her eyes. Insurance covered the basics, but the experimental treatments, the ones that might actually save her life, those cost more than most people make in a decade. Alexander felt something crack inside his chest. So you put your career on hold. What career? You can't exactly support cancer treatments on an entry-level publishing salary. So I started waiting tables, catering events, anything that paid well. The Plaza gig was supposed to be my last. Mom finished chemo last month, and I was going to go back to trying to be a real writer. She laughed, but it sounded more like crying. Instead, I destroyed the social event of the century and somehow ended up having tea with the groom. How is she? Your mother? The genuine concern in his voice nearly undid her. In remission, for now. Emma's voice broke slightly. The doctors say if she makes it 2 years without a relapse, her chances improve dramatically. Alexander reached across the table and covered her hand with his. The contact sent electricity shooting up her arm, but more than that, it felt like coming home. You saved her life, he said simply. I just did what anyone would do. No. His thumb traced across her knuckles, a touch so gentle it made her breath catch. You sacrificed your dreams to save someone you love. That's not what anyone would do. That's what heroes do. Outside the bakery's window, Jonathan Sterling Hayes lowered his camera, having captured several perfect shots of Alexander holding hands with the waitress. Perfect, he thought with vicious satisfaction. By tonight, these will be all over social media. Disgraced groom's sordid affair with the help. The board will have no choice but to remove him. And when they need a stable, reliable replacement to handle the Sterling-Hayes merger, well, I'll be right there. Emma stared at their joined hands, overwhelmed. Alexander, this is crazy. You're having tea with someone who can't afford to replace the shirt she ruined, whose idea of high fashion comes from Target clearance racks, who spent 2 years sacrificing everything for love. Alexander interrupted. Who stands up to bullies even when she's scared. Who has more integrity in her little finger than most people have in their entire bodies. His voice dropped to a whisper. Who made me realize I've never actually been in love before today. The bakery fell silent around them, or maybe Emma just couldn't hear anything over the roar of her own heartbeat. Alexander, I know it's insane. I know we just met. I know I've probably lost my mind. His grip on her hand tightened. But Emma, I meant what I said in that bathroom. I've never looked at anyone the way I look at you. I've never felt this desperate need to know everything about someone, to protect them, to what? Emma whispered. To love them, he finished, his voice raw with honesty. I know it's impossible. I know it's the worst timing in the history of terrible timing. But I'm falling in love with you, Emma Thompson, and I don't know how to stop. Emma felt tears spring to her eyes. Not sad tears. Overwhelming, terrifying, beautiful tears. Because this man, this impossible man, who lived in a different world, was looking at her like she was his salvation. "Alexander," she breathed, "I can't be the reason you threw your life away." "You're not the reason I threw it away," he said, bringing her hand to his lips and pressing the softest kiss to her knuckles. "You're the reason I finally started living." Jonathan Sterling Hayes smiled as he scrolled through the photos on his phone. Intimate moments, tender touches, the unmistakable look of two people falling in love. By evening, every gossip blog in the city would be running these images. By tomorrow, Alexander would be finished. And by next week, Jonathan would be sitting in the CEO chair he'd always deserved. "Enjoy your little romance while it lasts," he thought venomously. "Because I'm about to destroy both of you." As Emma and Alexander sat in their small corner of paradise, neither noticed the figure in the expensive suit walking away from the window, or the phone calls that would soon set their destruction in motion. They only had eyes for each other, and no idea that their hardest battle was yet to come. Location: Emma's apartment, Brooklyn, 6:30 p.m. Emma's cramped studio apartment had never felt smaller than it did with Alexander Whitmore folding his 6-foot frame onto her second-hand couch. He looked absurdly out of place among her thrift store furniture and dog-eared books, like a Renaissance sculpture accidentally delivered to a garage sale. "I should probably warn you," Emma said, heating leftover Chinese takeout on her ancient stove. "This isn't exactly Plaza Hotel dining." "Good," Alexander replied, genuinely meaning it. "I'm tired of perfect presentation hiding mediocre substance." He was studying her bookshelf with the intensity of an archaeologist, running his fingers over worn spines of Austen, Morrison, Garcia Marquez. "You've actually read all of these." "Some people collect wine. I collect stories." Emma watched him discover her notebook collection, dozens of composition books filled with her own writing attempts. "Don't look at those. They're terrible." But Alexander was already opening one, his eyes scanning her handwriting with growing amazement. "Emma, this is beautiful. You write like you see straight into people's souls." Heat flooded her cheeks. "It's just journaling. Practice stuff." "This isn't practice." He held up a passage about her mother's first chemo session. "This is art. Why aren't you published?" "Because art doesn't pay for cancer treatments," Emma said simply, taking the notebook from his hands. Their fingers brushed, and that electric current sparked between them again. Alexander caught her wrist gently, studying her face. What if it could? What if you didn't have to choose between dreams and survival? "Alexander," Emma's voice carried a warning. This was dangerous territory, the land of what-ifs and impossible promises. His phone erupted into violent buzzing, shattering the intimate moment. Alexander glanced at it and his face went pale. "Shit." "What?" 47 missed calls, 63 texts. His fingers flew across the screen, and with each message he read, his expression grew darker. "Emma, we have a problem." 20 blocks north, Jonathan Sterling Hayes poured himself a crystal tumbler of 30-year-old scotch and admired his handiwork. The photos had gone live at 4 p.m. sharp across every major gossip site. Disgraced groom's secret affair revealed. Who is the waitress who destroyed Manhattan's wedding of the century? The headlines were even more vicious than he'd hoped. His phone rang. Uncle Charles, right on schedule. "Jonathan, thank God you're answering. Have you seen the news?" Charles Sterling Hayes sounded exhausted. "I saw," Jonathan replied, injecting just the right amount of concern into his voice. "I tried to warn you about Alexander's instability, but I never imagined it would go this far. The board is meeting tomorrow morning for an emergency session. We need damage control fast. And Jonathan, I think it's time we discussed your expanded role in the family business." Jonathan's smile could have cut glass. "Of course, Uncle. Whatever you need." Emma watched Alexander's face cycle through shock, anger, and something that looked like devastation as he scrolled through his phone. "Alexander, what's wrong?" He turned the screen toward her, and Emma felt the world tilt off its axis. The photos were everywhere. Intimate shots of them at the bakery. Alexander kissing her hand, their foreheads almost touching across the tiny table, the look of absolute adoration on both their faces. But the headlines were brutal. Gold Digger's Jackpot. How a Scheming Waitress Seduced Manhattan's Most Eligible Bachelor. From Ketchup Catastrophe to Bedroom Conquest. The Calculating Woman Who Destroyed a Dynasty. Whitmore air falls for obvious honey trap. Inside sources reveal her desperate financial situation. Emma sank onto her couch, her legs suddenly unable to support her. Oh my God. Emma, you have to know I would never. I know. But her voice sounded hollow. These make me look like some kind of predator. Alexander's jaw clenched as he continued reading. Listen to this bullshit. Sources close to the Whitmore family reveal that Emma Thompson deliberately targeted the wealthy heir, using her mother's cancer diagnosis to manipulate his sympathies. The calculating brunette reportedly boasted to co-workers about her plan to land a rich husband by any means necessary. That's not true, Emma whispered. None of that is true. Of course it's not true, Alexander's voice cracked with fury. But someone fed them just enough real information to make the lies believable. Your mother's illness, your financial struggles, even the detail about your Columbia degree. How would gossip reporters know any of that? Emma felt ice forming in her veins. Someone at the plaza. Someone who heard us talking. Alexander's phone rang, and his father's name flashed on the screen. He declined the call, but it rang again immediately. You should answer it, Emma said quietly. No, whatever he has to say can wait. But the phone kept ringing. Charles Whitmore II was not a man accustomed to being ignored. Alexander. Emma's voice was steady, but he could see the pain in her eyes. Answer the phone. Deal with your family. This was always going to be impossible. Don't. His voice was sharp with panic. Don't do this. Don't let them win. Win? Emma laughed, but it sounded like breaking glass. Look around, Alexander. Look at these articles. Look at what they're saying about me. I'm not fighting them. I'm destroying you just by existing in your world. The phone stopped ringing, then immediately started again. I don't care what they say, Alexander said desperately. I don't care about the gossip or the board or... You should care, Emma exploded, finally showing the full weight of her pain. You should care that they're calling me a gold-digging whore. You should care that every person you've ever done business with is reading about how I manipulated you with sob stories about my dying mother. Alexander reached for her, but she pulled away. Emma, please. No. Tears were streaming down her face now. This is exactly why people like us don't end up with people like you. Because when the fairy tale ends, I'm the one they destroy. You'll be the charming playboy who got taken in by a scheming nobody. I'll be the desperate waitress who tried to climb above her station. The phone rang again. This time, a number Alexander didn't recognize. Answer it, Emma said flatly. Against his better judgment, Alexander picked up. Hello? Mr. Whitmore, this is Jessica Chen from the New York Post. I was hoping to get your comment on the photos of you and Ms. Thompson that surfaced today. Can you confirm whether you were having an affair during your engagement to... Alexander hung up, his face ashen. There's going to be more, Emma said with devastating calm. More calls, more photos, more stories. They're going to dig into every aspect of my life, twist every truth into another weapon against you. And eventually, you're going to realize that I'm not worth all this destruction. That's not true, isn't it? Emma stood, walking to her tiny window that overlooked the street. Alexander, be honest. 6 hours ago, you had everything. A company, a reputation, a place in society. Now what do you have? A scandal that will follow you for years, and a broke waitress who can't even afford to replace the shirt she ruined. Jonathan Sterling Hayes watched the gossip sites refresh with new content every few minutes. The story was spreading like wildfire, each iteration more vicious than the last. Social media was exploding with commentary, memes, think pieces about class warfare and social climbing. It was even better than he'd hoped. His phone buzzed with a text from one of his carefully cultivated media contacts. More photos coming tomorrow. Hotel security footage of them in the bathroom. This is going to be nuclear. Jonathan's smile widened. By tomorrow, Alexander would be completely ruined, and Emma Thompson would be the most hated woman in Manhattan. Alexander moved behind Emma at the window, close enough to feel her trembling, but not touching. Emma, I meant what I said at the bakery. You're not the reason I threw my life away. You're the reason I found one worth living. Pretty words, she whispered. But tomorrow there will be more photos, more lies, more reasons for you to wake up and realize what a mistake this all was. Then we face tomorrow together. Emma turned, and the pain in her eyes nearly brought him to his knees. No, Alexander, we don't. Because I won't be the weapon they use to destroy you. She walked to her door and opened it, her meaning crystal clear. Emma, don't do this. Don't let them. I'm not letting them do anything, she said, her voice breaking despite her attempt at strength. I'm protecting us both from something that was doomed from the start. Alexander stared at her, this incredible woman who was willing to sacrifice her own happiness to save his reputation. The irony wasn't lost on him. She was proving she loved him by pushing him away. This isn't over, he said quietly. Yes, Emma replied, tears spilling over despite her resolve. It is. As Alexander walked past her into the hallway, Emma caught his sleeve. For what it's worth, she whispered. Today was the best day of my life. Then she closed the door, slid down against it, and let herself shatter. Neither of them knew that tomorrow would bring revelations that would change everything. Again. Location: Whitmore Industries Boardroom, 8 a.m. Monday. The mahogany boardroom on the 42nd floor of Whitmore Tower felt like a tribunal. 15 board members sat around the massive conference table, their faces ranging from disappointed to openly hostile. Alexander stood at the head of the table in yesterday's wrinkled shirt, looking like a man who'd spent the night staring at his phone, debating whether to call the woman who'd broken his heart to save his soul. Charles Whitmore II presided over the carnage with the cold satisfaction of a king about to execute his heir. Ladies and gentlemen, I think we all know why we're here. The headlines speak for themselves. Board member Patricia Hancock slid a tablet across the table, showing the morning's fresh batch of articles. The photos were even worse today. Security footage stills of Alexander and Emma in the plaza bathroom, their faces close together, his shirt off, her hands on his chest. The context was completely innocent, but the optics were devastating. Alexander, his father continued with barely contained fury, care to explain how you've managed to destroy 30 years of careful reputation building in a single weekend? Jonathan Sterling Hayes sat 3 seats down from Charles, the picture of concerned family friend. Inside, he was celebrating. The board was ready to crucify Alexander. Uncle Charles was putty in his hands, and by noon, he'd be named interim CEO while they searched for suitable replacement leadership. Everything was going exactly according to plan, except for the manila envelope that had been slipped under his apartment door at 6 a.m., an envelope he'd been too busy preparing for this meeting to open. I fell in love, Alexander said simply, and the room erupted in scandalized murmurs. You fell in lust with a gold-digging waitress, board member Richard Sterling corrected coldly, and destroyed a merger worth $2.7 billion. Yes, I know the number, Richard. Alexander's voice carried steel. But tell me something. When was the last time any of you made a decision based on what your heart wanted instead of what your portfolio demanded? Hearts don't pay dividends, Charles snapped. No, but they make life worth living. Alexander straightened, and despite his rumpled appearance, he commanded the room. I spent 32 years being the perfect heir. Perfect grades, perfect connections, perfect engagement to a woman I didn't love. And what did it get me? A life so empty I didn't even realize I was suffocating until Emma Thompson showed me what breathing felt like. Jonathan felt a flicker of unease. This wasn't going according to script. Alexander was supposed to be apologetic, defensive, easy to dismiss. Instead, he sounded like a man who'd found religion and wasn't afraid to die for it. "So, you admit it," Patricia said triumphantly. "This woman manipulated you." "Emma Thompson," Alexander interrupted, his voice sharp as a blade, "is the most honest person I've ever met. She told me to walk away. She pushed me out of her life to protect me from exactly this kind of character assassination. And while you're all sitting here acting like I've committed some unforgivable crime, she's probably hiding in her apartment, reading lies about herself that would destroy anyone with less courage." Charles slammed his hand on the table. "Enough! Alexander, the board has lost confidence in your judgment. We're prepared to—" A sharp knock interrupted him. Marcus Chen entered, looking unusually pale. "Sir, I'm sorry to interrupt, but there's been a development. We've received some concerning information about the source of yesterday's photographs." Jonathan's blood turned to ice. The envelope. Shit. The envelope. Marcus placed a thick file on the table in front of Charles. "These documents were delivered anonymously this morning. Phone records, financial transactions, communications between Jonathan Sterling Hayes and several gossip bloggers." The room went deadly silent. Jonathan forced his voice to remain steady. "I'm sorry, what are you implying?" "I'm not implying anything," Marcus replied, his voice carefully neutral. "The evidence speaks for itself." Charles opened the file, his face growing darker with each page. Phone calls to TMZ, page 6, The Post. Payments to photographers. Jesus Christ, Jonathan, you orchestrated this entire media assault. Jonathan's carefully constructed world began cracking. How? He thought desperately. How did they get this information? I was so careful, so... Then it hit him. Marcus Chen. Alexander's assistant had always been too observant, too quiet. Had he been investigating from the beginning? "Uncle Charles, those documents could be fabricated." "Could they?" Charles held up a bank statement. $50,000 to celebrity photographer Jake Morrison, dated yesterday morning. Care to explain? The boardroom atmosphere shifted like a weather front moving through. Suddenly, Jonathan was the one under scrutiny, and Alexander was looking at him with dawning understanding. "You son of a bitch," Alexander said quietly. "You planned this from the beginning." Jonathan's mask finally slipped. "Planned what?" "Your public humiliation. That was all you, cousin. I just documented it." Documented it. Victoria Sterling Hayes appeared in the doorway like an avenging angel in Chanel, her face twisted with fury. "You manipulated it. You convinced me this marriage was about family legacy when all you wanted was to destroy Alexander so you could steal his position." The room erupted in chaos, board members shouting questions, accusations flying, decades of carefully maintained professional decorum exploding in a matter of minutes. "Victoria, what are you doing here?" Charles demanded. "Cleaning up the mess I helped create," she said, pulling out her own phone. "Jonathan came to me 6 months ago with his brilliant plan to merge our families and businesses. But it was never about the merger, was it, Jonathan? It was about positioning yourself as the stable alternative when Alexander inevitably failed." She played a recording, Jonathan's voice crystal clear. "Alexander's too emotional, too unpredictable. One public scandal and the board will beg us to take over. Then you'll be married to a figurehead while I run both companies." Jonathan lunged for the phone, but Alexander was faster, pinning his arm to the table with barely controlled violence. "You destroyed Emma's reputation." Alexander's voice was deadly quiet. "For stock options and a corner office." "She's nobody," Jonathan snarled, his composure finally shattered completely. "A waitress. You threw away billions for a nobody." "No," Alexander said, releasing Jonathan's arm with obvious disgust. "I threw away billions for somebody. The most extraordinary somebody I've ever met. And you turned her into a target because you couldn't stand that I found something you never will. Genuine love. Charles Whitmore looked like he'd aged 10 years in 10 minutes. Jonathan, I think you need to leave. Security will escort you. As security approached, Jonathan played his last, desperate card. You think she's so pure, so innocent? Ask her about the $100,000, Uncle Charles. Ask her about the payment she received from the Sterling Hayes account 3 days ago. Ask her why she really spilled that ketchup. The room froze. Alexander felt the world tilt. What payment? Jonathan smiled with poisonous satisfaction. Oh, you didn't know? Your precious Emma received a very generous payment from our family account last Wednesday. Funny coincidence, don't you think? Almost like someone paid her to what? Victoria stepped forward, her face pale. Jonathan, what did you do? I paid her to seduce you, Jonathan said to Alexander, relishing the devastation on his face. 100,000 to make you fall for her, to ruin the wedding, to destroy your credibility. She played her part perfectly. The silence that followed was deafening. Alexander felt something fundamental break inside his chest. Emma. His Emma, who'd claimed to love him, who'd pushed him away to protect him, who'd made him believe in fairy tales and second chances. Had it all been a lie? But even as the thought formed, something didn't fit. If Emma had been paid to seduce him, why had she pushed him away? Why sacrifice her payday for his reputation? Marcus, Alexander's voice was hoarse, verify that payment, now. Already on it, sir. Marcus was typing furiously on his laptop. The payment exists, but... His brow furrowed. It was never claimed. The money is still sitting in an uncashed check account. Jonathan's triumphant expression cracked. She never touched the money, Alexander breathed, understanding flooding through him like sunlight after a storm. But she had to have, Jonathan stammered. No, Alexander said, his voice growing stronger. She didn't, because Emma Thompson is exactly what I thought she was. Too good for any of us, including me. He turned to face the boardroom, and when he spoke, his voice carried absolute authority. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm resigning as CEO, effective immediately. Alexander, Charles started. I'm resigning to go get the woman I love and spend the rest of my life proving I deserve her. Marcus, liquidate my personal accounts. Set up a fund for writers who can't afford to chase their dreams, and send every penny of profit from my Whitmore Industries stock to cancer research. He headed for the door, then paused. Oh, and Dad, fire Jonathan. If you don't, I'll make sure every business publication in the country knows you harbored the man who orchestrated this entire scandal. As Alexander strode out of the boardroom, leaving chaos in his wake, he had only one thought. He had to get to Emma before she saw the morning news and believed Jonathan's lies. He had to tell her that love, real love, was worth more than all the money in Manhattan. And he had exactly 1 hour before the news cycle destroyed everything. Again. Location, Brooklyn Streets, Emma's apartment, 10:30 a.m. Alexander had never driven through Brooklyn like a man possessed. But then again, he'd never had everything that mattered racing away from him at the speed of breaking news. His Aston Martin weaved through traffic with surgical precision while his phone buzzed incessantly with calls from reporters, board members, and his father, all of which he ignored. The only call that mattered was the one Emma wasn't answering. 2 hours earlier, Emma had woken to her phone exploding with notifications. The morning news cycle had picked up Jonathan's final lie and run with it like wildfire. Exclusive. Waitress was paid $100K to seduce Whitmore heir. The headlines were even more vicious than before, painting her as not just a gold digger, but a professional seductress hired to destroy Manhattan's most eligible bachelor. She turned off her phone, unplugged her landline, and was now sitting on her bathroom floor in yesterday's clothes, staring at the wall and wondering how much more humiliation one person could survive. Alexander took the stairs to Emma's fourth-floor walk-up 3 at a time, his heart hammering against his ribs. The hallway smelled like coffee and broken dreams, and when he reached her door, He could hear the faint sound of crying from inside. The sound nearly killed him. "Emma!" He pounded on the door. "Emma, please, I need to talk to you." Silence. "I know you're in there. I know you've seen the news. But Emma, it's all lies. Every word of it is lies." From inside, Emma's voice came muffled and broken. "Go away, Alexander." "No." His voice carried absolute determination. "I'm not going anywhere. Not until you hear the truth." "The truth?" Emma laughed, and it sounded like glass breaking. "The truth is I was paid to seduce you. The truth is everything you felt was based on a lie. The truth is I should have stayed invisible where I belonged." Alexander pressed his forehead against the door, closing his eyes against the pain in her voice. "Emma, you never cashed the check." Long pause. "What?" "The $100,000 Jonathan paid you to seduce me. You never cashed it. It's still sitting in an unclaimed account, which means you never had any intention of taking his money." The door lock clicked, and Emma appeared in the crack, her face streaked with tears and swollen from crying. She looked like she'd been through a war and lost. "How do you know about the check?" "Because Marcus investigated everything. Because Jonathan confessed in front of the entire board. Because the truth came out, Emma, and the truth is that you're exactly who I thought you were. Too good to take blood money, even when you desperately needed it." Emma stared at him, her honey-brown eyes searching his face for deception. He told them I took the money. He lied. It was his last desperate attempt to destroy us." Alexander stepped closer to the crack in the door. "Emma, let me in. Please, let me tell you what really happened." After a moment that lasted forever, Emma opened the door. Alexander had seen her disheveled, had seen her embarrassed, had seen her scared. But he'd never seen her defeated, and the sight nearly brought him to his knees. She looked fragile, breakable, like she'd used up all her courage and had nothing left. "The news is saying I'm a professional seductress," she said dully. "That I've done this before. That targeting rich men is my business model. The news is wrong." Alexander closed the door behind him and reached for her, but she stepped back. "Are they?" "Because Alexander, think about it logically. A waitress spills ketchup on a billionaire right before his wedding? What are the odds? Maybe Jonathan was right. Maybe I did see an opportunity and—" "Stop." Alexander's voice was sharp. "Don't do that. Don't let him win by making you doubt your own heart." "My heart?" Emma's laugh was bitter. "My heart is what got us into this mess. My heart is what made me believe, even for a day, that someone like you could love someone like me." Alexander felt something crack inside his chest. "Emma, look at me." When she didn't, he gently took her chin in his hand, lifting her face until their eyes met. "I resigned this morning." Emma blinked. "What?" "I quit. Walked out of the boardroom, told them to find another CEO, liquidated my personal accounts." His thumb traced the track of tears on her cheek. "I gave it all up, Emma. The company, the money, the life I thought I wanted. All of it." "Why would you? That's insane." "Alexander, your whole life. My whole life was empty until I met you." His voice was rough with emotion. "Do you want to know what I realized sitting in that boardroom, listening to them tear you apart? I realized that I could live without the money. I could live without the company. I could even live without my father's approval. But I can't live without you." Emma felt fresh tears spilling over. "Alexander, don't say things like that. Don't make this harder. I love you." The words came out like a confession, like a prayer, like the most important truth he'd ever spoken. "I love that you spent 2 years sacrificing everything for your mother. I love that you pushed me away to protect me. I love that you never cashed that check, because taking money for fake feelings went against everything you believe in." "Stop," Emma whispered, but she didn't pull away from his touch. "I love your terrible apartment, and your dog-eared books, and the way you write like you can see straight into people's souls." Alexander's voice grew stronger, more certain. "I love that you made me want to be a better man. I love that you're brave enough to stand up to bullies and generous enough to forgive them. I love everything about you, Emma Thompson, and I'm not going to let Jonathan Sterling Hayes or anyone else convince you that love like this is impossible. Emma stared at him, her heart breaking and healing at the same time. Alexander, I'm nobody. I work in restaurants and live paycheck to paycheck, and you're everything. He pulled her closer until they were breathing the same air. You're a writer who's going to change the world with her stories. You're a daughter who moved mountains to save her mother. You're a woman who showed a lost man what love actually looks like. The scandal will never go away, Emma said desperately. Every time someone Googles your name, they'll see stories about the waitress who seduced you for money. Let them. Alexander's eyes blazed with certainty. Emma, I don't care what they say. I don't care what they write. I care about you. About us. About building a life where love matters more than headlines. Emma felt her resolve crumbling. This man, this impossible man who'd given up everything, was looking at her like she was his salvation. What are you asking me? She whispered. I'm asking you to be brave one more time. Alexander took her hands in his, and she could feel them trembling. I'm asking you to believe that sometimes fairy tales do come true, even for people like us. I'm asking you to marry me. The words hung in the air like magic. Emma's eyes went wide. Alexander, I know it's crazy. I know we've known each other for 36 hours. I know I have nothing to offer you now except a scandal and a man who's completely, desperately, impossibly in love with you. His voice broke slightly. But Emma, if you'll have me, I swear I'll spend every day of my life proving that giving up everything for you was the smartest decision I've ever made. Emma stared at him. This man who'd walked away from billions to stand in her crappy apartment and offer her his heart. And for the first time since this whole impossible dream began, she let herself believe. Maybe fairy tales weren't just for other people. Maybe love really could conquer everything. Maybe she was brave enough to say yes. Alexander, she breathed, and his name sounded like a promise. Is that a yes? He asked, hope and terror warring in his voice. Emma smiled through her tears, the first real smile she'd worn since yesterday. Ask me again. Alexander dropped to one knee right there in her tiny apartment, taking her hands in his and looking up at her like she was everything good in the world. Emma Rose Thompson, will you marry me? And Emma, who'd spent her whole life being invisible, who'd been called a gold digger and a seductress and worse, looked down at the man who'd given up his empire for her love and said the only word that mattered. Yes. The kiss that followed rewrote the laws of physics. Outside, Brooklyn kept spinning. The news cycle churned on, but inside Emma's tiny apartment, two people who'd found each other against impossible odds held each other like they were the only thing in the universe that mattered. Because they were. Location, Central Park, various, 6 months later. The autumn air in Central Park carried the scent of changing leaves and second chances. Emma sat on their favorite bench, the one where they'd had their second date after the media storm died down, reading the advance copy of her debut novel with trembling hands. Ketchup and Destiny, A Love Story, by Emma Rose Thompson Whitmore. The dedication is perfect, Alexander said, settling beside her with 2 cups of tea from the cart they'd discovered during their 3rd week of hiding from paparazzi. Though I still think you made me too handsome in Chapter 1. Emma laughed, the sound bright as sunshine. Impossible. If anything, I undersold your arrogance. Former arrogance, Alexander corrected, stealing a kiss that tasted like Earl Grey and forever. I'm a reformed man, remember? 6 months. 6 months since the morning that changed everything. The media fallout had been spectacular. Jonathan Sterling Hayes facing fraud charges, the Whitmore board in chaos, society pages exploding with the story of the billionaire who gave up his empire for love. But somewhere between the 20th interview request and the 50th marriage proposal from opportunistic socialites trying to console Alexander, the world had moved on to newer scandals. What remained was love. Pure, simple, Impossible love. Mrs. Thompson Whitmore, Alexander said, trying out her new name like a prayer. Your publisher called. They want to discuss the film rights. Emma nearly dropped her book. Film rights? Alexander, no one's even read it yet. I've read it. He pulled her closer, marveling as he did every day that she was his. It's going to change lives, Emma, just like you changed mine. Across the park, a familiar figure approached with hesitant steps. Victoria Sterling Hayes, looking softer somehow, less like a porcelain doll, and more like a woman who'd learned what real strength looked like. I hope I'm not interrupting, she said, her voice carrying none of its old ice. Emma tensed automatically, old habits from months of being treated as the enemy, but Alexander squeezed her hand reassuringly. Victoria, he said neutrally, how are you? Free, she replied with surprising honesty. For the first time in my life, actually free. No arranged marriages, no family pressure, no pretending to be someone I'm not. She looked directly at Emma. I owe you an apology. Several, actually. Emma blinked in surprise. Victoria, you don't need to. Yes, I do. Victoria sat across from them, her designer clothes looking oddly out of place in the casual park setting. I called you terrible names. I treated you like you were beneath me. I was so angry about the wedding being ruined that I never stopped to think maybe it needed to be ruined. Alexander felt Emma's hand relax in his. Even after all these months, she was still too generous, too quick to forgive. I was going to marry a man I didn't love, Victoria continued, to please a family that never really saw me. You, both of you, showed me what real love looks like, what it means to choose each other over everything else. What will you do now? Emma asked gently. Victoria smiled, and for the first time it reached her eyes. I'm moving to California, starting over. Maybe I'll write too. Seems to be going around. She stood, then paused. Oh, and Emma, Jonathan's sentencing is next week. 24 months for fraud, conspiracy, and about a dozen other charges. Turns out, when the FBI starts digging into someone's finances, they find all sorts of interesting things. Jonathan Sterling Hayes sat in his minimum security prison, reading the New York Times arts section with mounting rage. There on the front page was a glowing review of Emma's novel. A stunning debut that transforms a simple love story into a meditation on class, courage, and the power of choosing love over security. His hands shook as he read about her six-figure book deal, her upcoming literary tour, her engagement to the man he'd tried to destroy. She should be nothing, he thought bitterly. A waitress, a nobody. Not a celebrated author with a billionaire husband who looks at her like she's his whole world. But that was Jonathan's mistake. He'd never understood that love doesn't recognize class boundaries. That courage comes from the heart, not a bank account. That sometimes the most extraordinary people wear uniforms and serve canapes and change the world one story at a time. After Victoria left, Emma and Alexander walked hand in hand toward their apartment. Not the penthouse he'd sold, but a cozy brownstone in the village where Emma could write, and Alexander could build the non-profit literacy foundation that had become his passion. Any regrets? Emma asked, a question that had become ritual between them. Just one, Alexander replied, stopping to pull her into his arms. I regret that I wasted 32 years not knowing you existed. Smooth talker, Emma accused, but her eyes were shining. I learned from the best. You wrote me a love story that convinced me fairy tales are real. That evening, they attended the launch party for Emma's book at a small bookstore in Greenwich Village. The crowd was different from the society gatherings Alexander used to frequent. Writers, teachers, students, readers who understood that stories could change lives. Emma's mother, cancer-free for 8 months now, held court near the poetry section, regaling anyone who'd listen with stories about her brilliant daughter. Chef Rodriguez appeared at Alexander's elbow with a plate of canapes. Still can't believe little Emma wrote a whole book, he said proudly. And you, Mr. Big Shot CEO, you're really happy serving soup at homeless shelters? Alexander watched Emma signing books, her face glowing with joy as she talked to readers. Happier than I ever thought possible. Good, Rodriguez nodded sagely. Love like that. It's rare. You hold on to it. As the evening wound down, Emma found herself standing before a wall of her own books, still hardly believing it was real. The girl who'd served canapes to pay for her mother's cancer treatments was now a published author with a foundation supporting her work, and a husband who believed in her dreams more than she believed in them herself. "Penny, for your thoughts," Alexander said, slipping his arms around her from behind. "Just thinking about that morning 6 months ago. If someone had told me that spilling ketchup on an arrogant CEO would lead to all this, you'd have spilled it on purpose?" Emma laughed. "Maybe, though I still maintain it was an accident." "The best accidents usually are," Alexander murmured against her hair. "Like falling in love with someone you're supposed to despise. Like finding out that the person you thought was your enemy is actually your soulmate. Like discovering that fairy tales don't always start in castles. Sometimes they start with ketchup stains and second chances." Emma turned in his arms, looking up at the man who'd given up everything to choose love. "Alexander." "Yes, my love. I think our story's just beginning." Alexander kissed her then, surrounded by books and dreams, and the sweet impossibility of love that conquers all. And as their lips met, both of them could swear they heard the distant sound of wedding bells, not the ones that had been interrupted 6 months ago, but new ones, promising ones, belonging to a couple who'd learned that the best love stories aren't about perfect people in perfect circumstances. They're about imperfect people choosing each other, again and again, despite every reason why they shouldn't. The end. But really, it was just the beginning. 1 year later, the small chapel in Montauk was everything the Plaza Hotel wedding wasn't. Intimate, genuine, filled with people who loved Emma and Alexander for who they'd become, not who they used to be. Emma walked down the aisle in her grandmother's simple lace dress, carrying wildflowers and the kind of smile that could power cities. Alexander waited at the altar in a suit that cost a fraction of his old wardrobe, but looked perfect because it was chosen with love, not status in mind. When Father McKenna asked if anyone objected to this union, the chapel held its breath for exactly 1 second, because everyone remembered the last wedding that had gone spectacularly wrong. But the only sound was laughter, because sometimes the most beautiful love stories start with disasters and end with dreams coming true. "You may kiss the bride," Father McKenna said with a grin. And they did. And somewhere in Brooklyn, a little girl reading Emma's book smiled and thought maybe, just maybe, fairy tales really do come true, even for waitresses, especially for waitresses.